You are listening to Para X.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, Merry Meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Para X Radio Network. We're going to the movies tonight, in a manner of speaking, and tonight's opening song, Raven's Hollow by Midnight Syndicate, pretty much sets the tone. My guest is author Ian White, and he's got a new book out called Witchcraft and Black Magic in British Cult Cinema. Now, Ian's an author, a screenwriter, and journalist who's written television and film scripts for the BBC, Carlton TV, Television New Zealand, and the Gibson Group for Sun. He also writes for a number of magazines and websites and is a regular contributor to the U.S. publication Paranormal Underground. He's been studying witchcraft and the occult for many years and is fascinated by the interrelationship between cinema and the supernatural. And for that reason, he wanted Witchcraft and Black Magic in British Cult Cinema not only to celebrate many of the best-loved and most terrifying films ever made, but to explore the sources, both literally and historically, that inspire those films and to discover whether the rites and practices they depicted were ever mirrored in the real world. And the answers might surprise. The facts are sometimes more frightening than fiction. So, Ian, welcome to the show. I'm ready to be frightened and surprised.
Oh, hi, Marla. I'll try not to let you down. But it's good to be.
I'm easy. You don't have to worry about letting me down. I'm go with the flow.
Well, I don't want it's 2 o'clock in the morning here in London, so I don't want to frighten myself too much. Otherwise, boy, I'll never sleep tonight.
Yeah, well, you might not sleep till tomorrow, but hey, I read the book, and there are a lot of frightening things in there, and this is an amazingly complex book. It's got tons and tons of research, dozens of photographs, lots of little-known facts, and you've truly covered all bases, and I want to make mention of the fact that this is not a book full of movies and references that most Americans have never heard of, because we're talking about British cult. The great majority of the films discussed in the book are favorites to audiences on both sides of the pond, as are the actors who starred in them, like Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Lon Chaney Jr., Boris Karloff, to name a few. So what inspired you to write a book of this nature?
Well, I've always loved these kind of movies. You know, ever since I was a kid. I've loved horror films. My favorite horror films were always films that had something to do with witchcraft or with ghosts. You know, those were the two things. I never got into the zombies very much. I never got into Frankenstein's monster thing very much. But witchcraft really, it fascinated me. And even as a child, you know, I'd watch these films and I'd want to find out, or I'd wonder, you know, does this kind of thing ever really happen? You know, where does this come from? Where do these stories come from? So that's really where I wanted the book to come from, why I wanted to write the book. Because I wanted to explore a little bit more about the genesis of some of this, and also to talk about the fact that although witchcraft in films generally, the witches aren't the kindest characters in the movies. There is a difference. It's there's a difference between the witch in the real world and the witch in Hollywood, British cinema, in films. Even though witches in films are kind of cool, and it's always nice to be scared by them.
Well, yeah, and the witches in the films are probably quite a lot more entertaining than those of us in the flesh. Both look-wise.
No, I don't know. They don't have a radio show, but...
Well, you never know and how entertaining that can be sometimes. But it's just, it's like I always say, if you turn on any cable station around Halloween and like a Travel Channel station or something, and they interview a witch, she's always the most colorful, kind of slightly off-kilter, very entertaining witch, which really doesn't depict the rest of us. So, movies, TV, and regular shows, they just have to entertain. So it's not so bad, and there's always seems to be a little basis in truth in it all, which is even more interesting. Now, as I mentioned in your intro, you've been studying witchcraft and the occult for many years. Now, where did this interest come from? Well, the movies that got you in?
Sorry, Molly, you just broke up on me there.
Yeah, I just wondered if that was the movies that made you interested, or you were interested before the movies.
It really was. I did come into it from the point of view of thinking, hey, that looks really cool. I wonder if you really can dress up in a robe and wander around the forest at midnight and hang out with some really cute women. But bearing in mind, I was about 12 when I started to think that. But when I read more about the subject it just fascinates me. The lore behind it, the mythology of it, as well as the real belief systems behind witchcraft. Really, it was something that I wanted to know more about.
You took the next step, though. I mean, you didn't just have an interest. I mean, you really got into it, right?
Well, as you know, you helped me. You've been wonderfully generous with the help you've given me on various pieces I've written for Paranormal Underground, and so I have a very small, minor knowledge of how witchcraft actually works, but. I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of people like yourself and people who helped me with the book who are practitioners and have such tremendous knowledge and such, were very generous and very happy to sit down with me and talk to me about these kind of things. And I love to hear the stories. I love to hear and understand, or try and understand, what witchcraft, what Wicca, what that whole, that whole way of life is, and that whole philosophy is about. So it began with the films, and then from the films, or probably at the same time as the films, like I was interested in horror, so I was reading the books, but mostly those were ghost stories, the M.R. James kind of things. But I'd read a few things like Conjure Wife, the Fritz Lieber book about witchcraft. I fell in love with. So I'd enjoyed that, but I really wanted to find out more about the reality of it.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that kind of like eating a chip, a crisp. You can't just eat one. You need more and more information as you go.
You just want to keep finding out more and more, and then you have that was one of the things writing the book. You'll ask one question about something and you'll get an answer, and then you'll just, well, yeah, but hold on, but what about this, or can that apply if you try something this way? And it's like it just keeps opening up and opening up, and you know, everyone seems to have their own different take on how they will practice, on what they believe, how they will do certain things. You know, it's fascinating. It's like this constantly evolving, changing, very personal way of life and of thinking and of living, and I think it's actually quite wonderful, which is another reason I wanted to write about it. I wanted to at least put that, you know, that first chapter in there where I could talk a little bit about my understanding of the history of witchcraft and on where the differences were from the films, as well as being able to say, hey, we enjoy the films are cool, but you know, witchcraft itself, and people who practice witchcraft, you know, are fantastic. You know, this is a fascinating subject to look into. These are fascinating people, and it's not something we should feel a prejudice or a fear about. We should have a fascination for it, or you know, at least try and understand it.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the way we've been depicted over thousands of years kind of negates the possibility of ever being kind of the really kind of apple-cheeked women and smart people that we were before all the slander started. So yeah. It's kind of, you know, a little bit topsy-turvy there. But, you know, the facts, as you say, are more frightening than fiction because we're taught that fiction is always fantasy and over-exaggerated in the media. So were you shocked to find out that many scenarios depicted in fiction were born out of some perhaps scary truths in the real world?
I guess because I was coming at it from the point of view of wanting fruits. Sorry, I'm jumping all around the place here, but thinking about it, for example, if we take a film like The Wicker Man, you know, I was fascinated by. I loved the film to begin with, and I wanted to find out more about those kind of practices. Were there actually Wicker Men? I mean, this was years ago when I first saw The Wicker Man. I was completely intrigued by this thought. But then, over the past couple of years, while I've been digging around and thinking more about that subject, the bitter harvest kind of subject, the harvest home thing. I just read Harvest Home. I love that book. I came across the killing of a guy called Charles Walton, a murder that happened in Warwickshire in England in 1945, which was used by a writer as the genesis for a story which was perhaps, I haven't been able to pin it down exactly, but very possibly was known to the people who created the Wicker Man. So to actually find out that something really nasty happened quite recently, that kind of strange word, that begat this film, that is removed several times again, was quite fascinating to me. So it did shock me. Some of the things that I've read.
The thing about the Wicker Man too is, obviously we can't even discuss movies of this genre without talking about the Wicker Man, both the original and the 2006 version with Nicolas Cage. And when I heard about it, it was strongly suggested to me that the early version was so much better than the remake, and don't even bother with the newer one. And I did see the original and was fascinated, as you said. Where do you stand on the Wicker Man debate? The early one or the later one?
Oh, boy. Oh, the early one.
Yeah.
The early one. We've got to finish this conversation now if we're going to talk about the second one. No, I wasn't. I really, I'm with the people who really did not like that, the Nick Cage version. Mm-hmm. That was just not good at all. The first one, I think the original is kind of this Chinese puzzle box. That's what makes it so special. There's some wonderful writing in that. There's some great dialogue. The performances, Christopher Lee, he thinks, apparently, he said several times in interviews he thinks that's his finest film, and
Wow.
I would agree with that. I think he gives a wonderful performance. Edward Woodward's great in it. The whole thing feels authentic to me, whereas Nicolas Cage running around saying the bees, you know,
Yeah,
didn't extend much.
I never got through that one. Because the first one was so kind of off the beaten path, off kilter. It wasn't as you would sit down and watch a movie and, okay, this is what's going to happen next. Okay, I see this coming, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't. It was just very different, and I think that was the beauty of it.
You're
it
right.
Was creepy different, in a sense.
It was creepy different, and that, yes, exactly. But in that sense that it, you know, it wasn't anyone coming at anyone with knives and pitchforks and whatever.
Mm-mm.
It was that very subtle kind of, you know, the idea of this guy coming into this closed community and suddenly finding that the reason he was there to look for this girl, that might not be what's happening anymore. You know, just feeling that trap closing down around this guy. And also, I think that what is very special to me, and I think one of the reasons that people love the Wicker Man so much, the ones who do, is it very cleverly takes the conflict between the church and witchcraft and paganism, and it brings it down to this sort of this microcosm of this community, and particularly of the two characters, the Christian copper, as Christopher Lee calls the Edward Woodward character, you know, the very straight, uptight, you know, Puritan guy who will have nothing to do with any other belief that has nothing to do, you know, that isn't about God, and this community that he will not even attempt to understand, who, you know, have their own way of doing things, who see what they're doing as being something completely natural and about nature and about the way that things should be to keep the community alive. I think it's quite an intricate and beautiful film. It just looks stunning.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you talk about the archetypes and metaphors of like vampires and werewolves, the zombies and the mummies, but when it comes to witches, you say that the witch is different in that she is generally not a metaphor for something else. She's a non-fiction human being. Yeah. Why do you think witches get tossed into the monster pot and stirred around with the others so often?
Because they are an archetype of horror films. You know, they have been used as a villain in a horror movie. So I think people grow up with horror films and don't want to think too much about, or aren't interested in the realities of witchcraft or of that world, will just see witches as that, you know, kind of cartoon character who's alongside the monsters and the ghouls and the ghosts and you know, as someone who's as a character that's not real. And I think the thing is with most horror movie monsters, that's fine. You know, I mean, horror monsters are archetypes for a reason. You know, when we're looking at vampires, as I say in the book, as we all know, vampires were really, a lot of that is about xenophobia. It's about a fear of the foreigner. It was, you know, a fear of the person coming outside. It's also a fear of sexual disease. You know, there was no sort of surprise that Francis Ford Coppola chose to remake Dracula when, you know, the fear of AIDS was pretty much at its highest. It's, you know, the whole idea of blood diseases, that was something that vampirism's about.
Exactly.
And then, of course, we've got the monster, we've got Frankenstein, and that's not about the monster, that's about man trying to become God, messing with God, you know, digging up. It's a bad idea to dig up bodies and stitch them together, and this is what happens if you try and become bigger than the creator. It's all going to go wrong. Whereas witches, you know, that's if we destroy those kind of monsters, we're just destroying. We're not destroying anything real. We're just destroying a metaphor for something else. But when we destroy a witch on the screen, you know, the emotion that a filmmaker wants us to feel, you know, that we want to see this thing destroyed. We want the hero to win. You know, when we're talking about a witch, we're actually talking. You know, there's a danger of confusing the witch that we see on screen, with the idea that the witches in the real world should, deserve to be destroyed, are as evil and as nasty as the ones that we're looking at in front of us on the TV, on the big screen. And I think that's dangerous, and it perpetuates a myth.
Sure. Well, it started all back there at the Burning Times and the Malleus Maleficarum. It's been going on for centuries before film, but we were talking about the witches, and one thing that was kind of interesting that you wrote in the book was about the 1966 film The Witches, where the British Board of Film Censors warned Hammer that it would certify the film, or would not certify the film, if it included the misuse of Christian emblems or any parodies of Christian prayer, which also indicates how far ahead of the curve that Joan Fontaine was when she purchased the material. And I'm just kind of quoting from the book about the BBFC had passed movies about witchcraft in the past, but there was a level of authenticity to the witches that most of the previous films didn't possess. It wasn't a caricature story or anything like that. This is the kind of stuff that you go into so deeply and explain the backstories on a lot of things, which I find absolutely fascinating. And the other thing I found fascinating when we talk about Joan Fontaine, the actors, because I'm guessing that this was a period where anybody did a movie of witchcraft or the occult or something, just like in the 50s, anybody who was anybody was in Westerns. It just kind of seems to work that way. But, we're talking about, so many stars that you wouldn't expect. Vincent Price, yes, you would expect to see him. But like Joan Fontaine, Sharon Tate in that Satan's Claw movie. And then people like David Niven and Deborah Kerr in The Eye of the Devil. That's a far cry from him in the Pink Panther movies and her in The King and I. It's just kind of amazing.
Sorry, Mother, can I just quickly put in while we're talking? The Sharon Tate was in Eye of the Devil, not in Satan's Claw. She was in the Marvel thing.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Just so that, because one of the things that was one of the few films when I approached the book that I'd never seen before, and I love that film. Have you seen that film?
No.
No. Try and check it out. It is quite wonderful. It's a real precursor to the Wicker Man. So as you know from the book, a lot of the ideas that come through the Wicker Man are there in that film. But I personally think it's a better film than the Wicker Man. Sharon Tate and David Hemmings, both, they play both brother and sister in it, and they are not only gorgeous to look at, but they are phenomenally kind of creepy, sensual, wonderful characters, and David Niven and Deborah Kerr in it are just wonderful. But I've just gone off on a tangent, then. Sorry.
No, please. I like tangents.
Yeah.
There's just, I want to talk a little bit about the witch hunts, and one of the movies that everybody seems to love, Witchfinder General with Vincent Price. And the other one that I truly adore, and I remember this from the 70s, I was like, oh, this is a great movie, The Devils with Oliver Reed, both of which deal with the burning times and the witch trials. And I want to talk about both movies in that sense, but when I was reading about Witchfinder General, I had a moment of Monty Python and the Holy Grail come to play, because it talks with their How to Tell a Witch, because I was reading that Price's character, Matthew Hopkins' favorite method of torture to the accused witches was binding and swimming, and that meant, dipping them in the water, and if they floated, they were a witch, and if they drowned, they were innocent. So, it just, Monty Python, bless them, will always show up in the weirdest places, even in perfectly serious conversations. But the Devils, let's talk about that for a minute. Here was this really hard-hitting film in the 70s, about nuns. God forbid we should cross the religion line here. nuns that were suffering from hysteria or hysterical hallucinations after perhaps eating bread baked with diseased rye. And this is kind of mimics what happened in Salem during the witch trials, not only in faking claims of witchery, but also the so-called demonic behavior of the accused witches who were said to have eaten tainted grain. So this is kind of like life imitates art, or vice versa.
No, that's true. But the other thing, though, with the devils that I think separates it from what happened in Salem is there was a huge political motivation towards what happened there. I mean, the nuns, may or may not have eaten this diseased bread, this moldy bread, and that might have had a reason for some of the behaviors. But, Urban Grandier, who's the character that Oliver Reed plays in the film, but who was actually, a real guy, a real character, was basically trying to keep the French king and the Catholics away. He was trying to keep Catholicism, that kind of oh boy, I can't think of the words. He was just trying to keep religion away from the walls of Loudun, of the city that he was looking after, because Loudun was a city where people of any religion could congregate and live happily side by side and be together. But the French king and the Catholics they didn't want that. They wanted the walls torn down, and they wanted Catholicism to take hold there. So when the whole business happened with the nuns, that was largely because of this is the history of it. As the history goes, the Mother Superior of that particular convent held certain kind of desires towards Urban Grandier and wanted him to represent the convent. And he refused. He sent somebody else to come down and visit the convent on his behalf. And the Mother Superior wasn't very happy about this. And one of the stories goes, the familiar story, is that she accused Urban Grandier of being a witch because she wanted him to pay. She said that Urban Grandier came to her during the night and made her perform certain acts. And then the nuns around her picked up on this hysteria, or maybe that was also because they were eating, that maybe there was a hallucinogenic element to this. But one way or the other, this was all the church and the political side of everything. They saw an opportunity there to come in and go, okay, right, we've got all these accusations against this guy, and this is our excuse to come in and get rid of him, accuse him, burn him, pull down the city walls, which is what happened.
Mm-hmm. It was a very compelling movie. I mean, it was one that you just couldn't take your eyes for a minute away, because it was really, really hard hitting compared to some of the stuff that was coming out at that time. And the other thing that kind of made me laugh was in Witchfinder General, one of the criticisms of the movie, although most people love it to death, it was about the fact that Vincent Price's character, Matthew Hopkins, in real life was in his 20s, 30s maybe, but 20-ishes, and Price was at least 20 years older than that when he was cast in the role. Right. But, I mean, that is nitpicking so much, because I can't think of anybody better than Vincent Price to have played the Witchfinder General. It was classic casting.
I think you're absolutely right. The director of Witchfinder General, a young guy called Michael Reeves, and this was his last film. He only made 3 films. He originally wanted Donald Pleasance to play that part. But American International Pictures were putting some of the money, or quite a lot of the money, into the financing of the film. So they were the ones who pushed for Price. So basically said, if you don't use Vincent Price, then you're not going to make this movie. And Michael Reeves wasn't very happy about it at the time, and quite famously there was quite a lot of friction on the set between Reeves and Price. But it's pretty much, I think, Vincent Price's best film. It's certainly one of the best films, or the best film of the genre.
Because he could play evil so gentlemanly. It's hard to explain, but yes, he could. And I can't think of anybody that would have been better.
Yeah, but he does it without the camping, Witchfinder General. You know, I always think when you watch Vincent Price, like, for example, one of my favourite Vincent Price movies is a film called Theatre of Blood, or the Dr. Phibes films. Or, you know, there's always that kind of twinkle in the eye with Vincent Price. There's kind of a real campness to it. Whereas with Witchfinder General, I think it might well be one of the few horror films that he ever made, I think, where you can see a real steel and a real kind of menace to this guy. And this guy's a really nasty piece of work, and there is no humour to him at all.
No, and he did quite well at it. And, you know, following up on the topic of the witch hunts, you mentioned that when the witch hunts ended, public concerns about witchcraft appeared to have ended with them. However, the English Witchcraft Act of 1735 would occasionally be dusted off to rebuke someone who claimed to have magical powers, and 2 women were convicted under the act as late as 1944. That surprised me. And do you know any more about the conviction? I mean, what was their punishment, or were they just, you know, slap at the hand, or were they jailed or something worse?
Well, there was one, the one that, and I'm trying to remember her name, and it's just slipped past me now. I wasn't expecting this question, but the one from 1944 was a lady whose name I cannot remember, but she was a medium. And during a seance, she made contact with a dead sailor who was on board a ship during the war, and the ship had been torpedoed, and he drowned. And what got her in trouble there was that the news hadn't come through to the Ministry of Defence yet that this ship had actually gone down, and that these lives had been lost. So the suspicion was that she knew something sort of on the enemy side, you know, that there wasn't anything supernatural about this at all, that she knew, she was already aware that this thing was going to go down with the boat. So there was kind of the implication there was they were kind of getting her on the mediums because she was a medium, but they were really after her because they thought there was an intelligence act situation here. You know, that there was some spying, there was something else happening.
That's tough because, you know, it's hard to find a good medium, and then when you find one, she gets in trouble for being something else, like Mata Hari or something, which is pretty funny.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I spoke with a lady a few weeks ago. I've written a piece for Paranormal Underground about black-eyed children, and the lady I spoke with is a medium and a psychic who has taken pictures of some of the children that have recently been spotted over here in England. But the reason I'm mentioning this is she told me that her grandmother was a medium back in the 50s, just before the law changed. And she used to go to seances, and you know, the church, not the spiritualist church, but this was, you know, she had to keep things very quiet even in the 50s, because otherwise she would, you know, she was doing something against the law and she could be arrested for it. And just talking to someone who had a relative that recently, you know, who was in that kind of fear, just blew my mind a little bit, to be honest with you. It's an odd thought to me. It's a disturbing thought, really.
It is. And see, these are the things in the book, these little bits and pieces. I mean, you go into great detail about movies and things, but there's all this other stuff, the backstories, the history. Now, here's what I mean, this jumped right out at me, and I'm like, I didn't know any of this. And either I'm very daft or, you know, it just didn't come across. But you know, you wrote about how English witches played their own part in the war effort during World War II. that on Lammas, 1940, hundreds of witches from covens throughout England descended on the New Forest to build a psychic cone of power, and telepathically did it to prevent Hitler and his forces from invading England. And then we'll go way back, in 1588, a cone of power had held off the Spanish Armada, and in 1700, English witches had waged a similar telepathic battle against the French troops of the Emperor Napoleon. And then, even more recently, the self-styled King of Witches, Alexander's, claimed to have conducted magical rituals that aided Britain's efforts in the Falkland Wars. Now, this is really good stuff, and I don't think a lot of people know that, and I think, more importantly, a lot of people would not expect to find that in a book about cult films. So this, to me, is what makes it so great.
Oh, thank you so much, Marla. Wow. Yeah, well, it's that kind of thing that really interested me. And it was, but it was through having that interest in the films. If I hadn't been interested in the films, I'd never have discovered this. I'd never have gone, I'd never wanted to dig into this kind of information. And I find all of that fascinating. I particularly find the what happened during the war, the cone of power, the New Forest witches. That's something that I'm trying to find out a little bit about right now, because that is just incredible to me that more people aren't aware that happened. And to me, that could make in itself a wonderful subject for a film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, it was okay. So we've talked about vampires. We've talked about, all the other things. And we touched on the devil worship. And I read in the book that you're not comfortable with the films that confuse witchcraft with devil worship. And that's an issue I think we all in real life deal with as well. I mean, why do you think that we're going to be eternally, we pagans, we witches, we whatevers, are going to be eternally tied to the devil in people's minds?
Well, I think, it all began all those centuries ago, didn't it, when the church were quite happy for people to be practicing until they realized that it was taking people away from them and taking money from the coffers, and so they had to have a reason to say that, hey, all these practices, these Sabbaths aren't a good idea, and what can we do? We can point at the person who's wearing the horns and say he's the devil. So the witches are bringing the devil to the Sabbath, so it's a devil. That they are worshipping the devil. So it sort of started there, has always been my understanding of it. And then, when the church wanted to continue this, and they wanted to burn witches, and they wanted witchcraft, paganism, they wanted it all wiped out, then the devil was the reason to do it. They had to put witches together in people's heads, together with the devil, with Satan, with evil, and it's a really nice piece of PR for them. And we've never actually escaped from that connection. And filmmakers and writers of witchcraft tales have always been drawn to making that, to perpetuating that connection, and then you have films that really muddy the waters. You have films, which are a film that I love that's in the book, City of the Dead, which over in the States is known as Horror Hotel. It's a horrible title for a really good film. For example, that confuses the idea. They bring a witch out at the beginning of the film, and they put her on the stake, and just as she's about to get burnt, she makes a plea to Satan to come down and save her and to destroy everyone in the village and destroy their descendants. So it's always been something that people have confused and have wanted to confuse. It's added that edge to the reason why we shouldn't like witches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we get the bad rap. And, I mean, there are a lot of... I'm guessing that Rosemary's Baby is kind of one of the newer age devil films, to put a bad label on it. But I've never seen The She-Beast or Blood on Satan's Claw. or even Eye of the Devil. I mean, I must have missed out on this, or maybe there was something subconscious in me going, that's all not true, I'm not going to watch it, I'm not going to give any credence to that. I don't know. Or they were maybe even more B movies or something. But it just seems like it's something that just kind of has always followed us around for generations. And I just kind of like the fact that every so often things get put into a better perspective. I mean, when people watch Rosemary's Baby, and I know, this is one that you covered in the book, but it was presented in such a different way that you didn't expect to have, Satan himself come dancing out and doing a booga booga on you. I mean, it was done in a scarier way. I don't know if I'm getting this across, but it was scary, but you weren't necessarily afraid of the devil. I think you were more sympathetic to the character of Rosemary than worried about the devil being the father, kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean,
a kinder and gentler devil.
Yeah, well, I think why Rosemary's Baby sustains is it's not so much about the devil and about, devil worship as it is about this young woman who is maybe she's just becoming absolutely paranoid about what's going on around her. And, right. She's pregnant and she's not dealing with the pregnancy. There's the best horror films, I think, the best horror stories, whether they're about witchcraft and whether they're about ghosts, the things that scare us, I think, are the things that we can understand on a very human level, that don't connect with us particularly supernaturally, but that actually could go on, that we can understand could happen in our own lives, or evoke feelings that we have had, or thoughts that we can imagine having about something, or situations we can imagine being in. And I think that's where Rosemary's Baby is so effective. I think the devil element of Rosemary's Baby is not as important as the element of this poor woman who might be gradually crumbling away, or is there a conspiracy going on with her husband and her neighbours, and what is it about, and is the devil really a part of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, the baby is born and it's in the crib and you don't see it right away. You're sitting there imagining, well, has it got a tail? Has it got horns? Little hoovies? Yeah, what kind of booties can you put on a little hooved baby kind of thing? It's more psychological thriller, I think, than the old-fashioned devil scary films.
Yeah, it is, and it's the other thing is it's so brilliantly directed. The people there are people out there who think that they've seen the baby when they've watched the film. If you go on message boards, people will talk about the releases on Blu-ray, DVD, whatever, and they'll say, no, this is cut, because I remember seeing this, and I know they showed the baby, and they never showed the baby. Right. And it's quite interesting to me, power of not just of the story itself, but the direction of the performances. The idea that it can project, a good film like that can project something into us that isn't even on the screen, but we think we're looking at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's like horror films.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Mark.
No, go ahead. Finish.
No, I was going to say, sometimes it seems to me that sometimes that films, not just horror films, but really, really good cinema can create a magic of its own. There can be almost an element of a magic spell to really effective cinema, because sometimes it can plant things inside us that aren't even there on the screen.
Mm-hmm. I think great writing and great directing in a film that plays with our minds is the best kind. Like you said, they swear they saw the baby. How good is that in making that movie, to actually have people, hallucinate in their minds, for lack of a better word? I mean, that's very, very cool. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, these how many movies? There are several. Go ahead.
No, go on. I'm listening.
No, you were actually saying something, so I just interrupted. All right, I'll interrupt again.
Sorry,
How many?
Clicking in and out each other.
How how many movies do you talk about in the book? I mean, I know there are quite a few. I just didn't count them. I was too busy reading them.
Oh, whoa! I haven't counted them either.
Okay, ballpark.
I'd say a couple of. We're up for a couple of dozen there. I'd say at least about 20 films are in that book. But you know, some of the chapters we've got some quite small chapters. Those are the ones the Witchfinder General and the Devil's chapters, about the real kind of the real historical stories behind the films. And then we've got other chapters, like the chapter about the bitter harvests, the Wicker Man chapter, where we talk about other films, the Wicker Man, the Eye of the Devil, the Witches, those kind of things. So yeah, I mean, once we throw in all of the kind of the side references to films, there are probably about 20 odd films at least that we talk about, and most of those I try and go into some kind of depth about.
Well, yeah, there is a lot of depth in that. There are also a lot of beautiful illustrations. Some of the movie posters, some are stills from the movies. Yeah. I mean, it's quite a wonderful book to read because it captures your imagination, it captures your eye, and it also has you find yourself kind of arguing points back and forth in your head. Because you bring up a lot of this side, that side, and it works out really well. So I was really, really happy, and I really need to go back and read the whole thing completely because I was just like, things were jumping out at me as I was taking notes and things, and just amazing amount of work that went into it, but film buffs, and especially of that genre, will absolutely, love it. It's one of those must-have kind of books. And you weren't like poked by the devil to do it either. I mean, you did it all by yourself. So, but I like the devil's. Yes. What, you broke up?
Yeah, no, it was the best writing job I've had. I enjoyed it so much. There's nothing better than writing about something that you love and that you're passionate about, and it gives you the excuse to do a bit of research and to ask people questions. And I've had nothing to do with the illustrations. The publishers actually sent me the proof with the illustrations in about a month ago. That was the first time I saw how they put it together, and I've got to say, I like you. I think some of the pictures they've chosen there are absolutely wonderful. There are some posters in there that I've never seen. That are just, the work they put in has been sensational. I'm really quite proud of it, if I'm allowed to say that. They've done some lovely work.
They have, and you did, and on those lines, where can people find the book? It just came out recently, yes, like a couple of days ago, right?
The book came out on Monday, and you could find the book if you go onto Hemlock Books' website. It's www.hemlockbooks, which is all one word, .co.uk. And they've got a special offer on there. I think it's something like, I don't know how this translates in dollars, but it's the £11, I think 25 in British money. But yeah, so it's up there, and it's a great present for Christmas. And they've asked me to do a follow-up about ghosts and hauntings that I'm starting to research at the moment. So there will be another one, probably this time next year.
That's great. I'm looking forward to that. I think, I don't know where I saw that you said that, or maybe you just told me about it, but it's absolutely a perfect way to follow it up, one to the other. I can't thank you enough for coming on tonight and talking about it. Other than the other book, are you making any appearances? Are you doing any other projects in the near future?
No, I'm just carrying on writing for Paranormal Underground. I'd like to say the other book, there are two books that are being released in this particular series. These are called Hemlock Horror Companions. The other book is by a friend of mine called Simon Fitzjohn. If people want to have a look at that when they're on the website, it's about the American director Bob Clark, who made a fantastic film that a lot of people know called Black Christmas. That's a lovely book as well. That's beautifully put together. So I just wanted to give that a quick plug for Simon, because he's some beautiful work on that. But no, I'm trying to get a novel finished, which I know I mentioned to you off and on when we talk, but has never quite been done yet. So I'd like to get that finished, and I'm putting a project together for a film company and a film actress that I'm hoping might go somewhere, but we'll see. We'll see. It's very early days, but that's going to be about horror in cinema as well. So we'll see. There's a few things happening.
Great. Well, stay on the line if you can after we get off so we can thank you properly. And thank you for being here. This is an amazing topic and a very good book to read. So anybody, Christmas is coming up. And I want to thank everybody for listening in as well. And if any of you want to listen to the show again, or in case you've missed any recent editions of Stirring the Cauldron, the podcasts are up at www.stirringthecauldron.podomatic.com. And they can also be found on iTunes if you just type in Stirring the Cauldron at the iTunes store, and poof, it's like magic. They'll be there. So again, thank you, Ian, and we look forward to having you back. There's a lot of stuff you're doing that we can talk about. And until next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at this same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2014. Moonlight Hall by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.